Hey gang, today we are going to do Petey by Ben Wilson, chapter 14. So, if you have your books, follow along so you can be looking at vocabulary. Chapter 14. After Mrs. Elgin's visit, Owen organized more activities for Petey and Calvin. Each Friday night, he took them to watch a movie. Each Wednesday night, he visited the ward on his own time and took both men dancing. Dances held in the Warren Building were lively events with a band made up entirely of patients. Several of the band members had been concert musicians before coming to Warm Springs, and although unstable, they retained their musical abilities. Owen would wheel Petey out of the dance floor and move him back and forth to the sound of waltzes and foxtrots. During these moments, Petey tilted his head back and closed his eyes. A blissful smile betrayed his thoughts. Trips to the movies or dances meant going outside. Calvin never showed any reaction, but Petey opened up with intense laughter and wonderment. Rolling down the sidewalk, he cooed contentedly. Daily, Owen tried to keep his two friends entertained. Ignoring the protests of other patients, he allowed the two men to watch their favorite TV shows. Unable to say Calvin's name, Petey adopted the name Ike after watching a documentary on Dwight Eisenhower. This was a name he could pronounce without using his tongue. Soon, Petey called, Ike! Ike! Petey's favorite shows were Wagon Train and Have Gun Will Travel. The Three Stooges helped Calvin venture from his self-imposed exile. One day, after watching The Three Stooges, Calvin picked up a broom and swung it in circles. Accidentally, he whacked Petey in the face and knocked out 3 of his teeth. For the next month, Petey grunted at Calvin to keep away. Only after dozens of apologies did Petey finally allow Calvin near. Life continued playing hardball with Petey. Being spastic, he often suffered damage from uncontrolled jerks. One day, while being shaved with a straight razor, a noise surprised him. The resulting jerk opened up a 4-inch gash across his right cheek. Nearly 2 years after Owen befriended him, Calvin began opening up his closely guarded world. Calvin, Owen asked one day, what did you think about when you were lying each day by Petey's bed? I was dreaming. I've seen people go crazy in this place with all the noise and stuff. Only way I could get away from it was to dream. Mostly about castles and dungeons, 'cause they have people screaming in dungeons. Ever dream about anything else? Calvin blushed. Well, yeah. Sometimes about pretty girls. That way I wouldn't go nuts. Owen laughed. That would drive me nuts. Calvin smiled big. Maybe we're both crazy. Yeah, maybe you're right, Owen agreed. By 1973, Owen knew he must leave Warm Springs. The daily regimen demanded too much. Stricter rules and the directives from the new administrator hastened his decision. One week, a newly posted notice forbade the feeding of bread and crackers to the ducks on the pond. Evidently, patients were saving food and feeding their feathered friends. Owen shook his head in disgust. How could such a simple pleasure be taken from people already so deprived? Owen made a papier-mâché duck. The morning he left, he defiantly floated it on the pond. He hung a sign around the duck's neck that read, Give us this day our daily bread. Owen laughed as he left the pond, but his amusement had disappeared by the time he entered the ward to bid his friends goodbye. Chatting, he wandered among the staff and patients, shaking hands with each of them. After nearly an hour, the duty nurse chided him. Owen, either leave or get back to work. Owen smiled sadly. I still have to talk to Petey, he said. He had been avoiding this painful task. He wasn't worried about Petey's care. Now Petey had become everybody's favorite patient. Someone had even started a photo album for him. Several of the nurses fussed over him and Calvin as if they were children. No, what Owen dreaded was his own loss. Petey had almost become family. Petey loved life more than any human Owen had ever met. Petey savored moments with fathomless appreciation. Simple joys and pleasures became splendid happenings. His compassion and thoughtfulness defied reason. Owen spotted Petey, sitting near an open window, absorbed in thought. Beautiful day, he remarked. Petey started, jerking his arms wildly. Aye, what? He knew this was Owen's day off. Petey, I'm afraid I have some bad news. What? What? Petey's arms jerked again, straining with the question. Concern clouded his eyes. I'm leaving Warm Springs. Petey sat stunned. Why? Because I'm getting to be an old duff now. I'm 73. It's time they put me out to pasture. Disbelief muddied Petey's gaze. Ooh, go. I have to go, old buddy. I'll be staying in Montana, so I'll visit. Owen turned away from Petey's agonized gaze. Staring down, he struggled with his words. I want you to remember something for me, will you? What? Petey grunted, his grief evident. Someday, somewhere, there's gonna be a better world. When we get there, my friend, you're gonna be at the front of the line. You hear me? The front of the line. Owen leaned over, giving Petey a strong hug. Petey hugged back, using only his emotions. After Owen left, Petey withdrew into himself. Owen visited only once. The visit devastated Petey as well as Calvin, reminding them of their loss. Petey resigned himself to the empty feeling. He had many friends at Warm Springs, but they weren't the same as Owen. Now, Petey felt old. He could not recall how old he was, but he knew he was well over 50. Petey suspected that the numbing rhythm of time that permeated his existence would be a rhythm that carried him into eternity. He accepted life and the metronome of boredom as he did his twisted limbs. He accepted not having a family, and he resolved to no longer allow hope to torment him with empty promises. This resolve gave Petey a certain feeling of control. That feeling, however, did not last. In the fall of 1975, Petey noticed patients being moved from the ward. The Christmas of 1977, Calvin was taken away without warning. The only explanation given was that he had been transferred. 1 month later, the nurse announced, Petey, tomorrow you're moving to Bozeman. Why? As part of a state modernization program, anyone who can be better cared for elsewhere is being moved out. He'll do better in a nursing home. Petey's mind raced. He had never known any place other than Warm Springs. What was a nursing home? The nurse saw his fear. Don't be scared. You're going to a place called Bozeman Nursing Home. It's a nice place without all the noise and crazy people. You'll have your very own TV, and you'll get to go outside. Each month you can buy things you want. You'll make wonderful new friends. Petey shook his head forcefully. Everything he knew and understood was here. The unknown frightened him terribly. Why couldn't he stay at Warm Springs and have Calvin back? Who ba Ike? He blurted, forcing his words out frantically. Who ba Ike? The nurse shook her head and gave Petey an apologetic look as she turned to leave. I'm sorry, Petey, I just don't understand you. After she left, Petey couldn't shake the haunting question in his mind. How about Ike? That evening, a bleak wind blew down across the hospital grounds, wrapping Petey tightly in despair. He felt as bitter as the wind. Where was Calvin tonight? Was he okay? They had never even gotten to say goodbye to each other. Late into the night, the wind howled loudly, keeping Petey awake. Warm Springs was all he'd ever known, all he'd ever wanted, and all he could imagine. Everything in his universe was visible from the ward. Where was Bozeman, and how would he get there? He was in a wheelchair. What did they do with people in wheelchairs? The following morning, Petey hid behind a deep silence as a nurse prepared him for leaving. Petey, today's the big day. You're going on a train ride, she said. In Bozeman, they'll pick us up at the depot. I'll go with you to the nursing home. Aren't you excited? Petey closed his eyes tightly, but the darkness refused to dissolve his fear. Soon, the noise of the train pounded Petey with a rhythmic click-clack, click-clack. The sound had a vague and haunting familiarity. Crazed with fear, like a frightened rabbit, Petey wanted to run and never stop. As the train screeched to a halt in Bozeman, snowflakes as big as quarters drifted down, silhouetted the bright brick depot. A white van pulled into the yard, swung a large arc in the lot, then backed against the dock. Nobody, including Petey, could see the ghost of a little boy carried onto a train at this very spot half a century earlier. Inside the van, Petey closed his eyes and shuddered deeply. Not until they rolled him into Bozeman Nursing Home did he open his eyes. He rebuffed any smiles and encouragement as he lay helpless, his worst nightmare becoming real. As curiosity gradually chipped away at Petey's fear, he felt himself pulled into a cramped little room. Without help, the grated door closed. The movement startled Petey, and his arm struck the wall hard. He stared through the grating in confusion. The whole room was moving downward. "Hey, Petey," the nurse chimed. "I'll bet this is your first ride in an elevator, isn't it?" Petey refused to speak as they wheeled him into a small corner room, barely large enough for his bed, a chair, and his wheelchair. He did notice it had windows, big, open, wonderful windows that covered 2 whole walls. An hour later, as the nurse from Warm Springs prepared to leave, Petey broke his silence. "Gooba, gooba," he blurted desperately to the last departing shred of his world. And then he was totally alone. Nurses and aides kept entering the room to meet Petey, each failing to hide surprise, seeing his twisted features. They administered looks of sympathy, then hastily exited. Bozeman Nursing Home and Warm Springs shared the same rhythm of life, slow, methodical, monotonous. The first weeks were pure hell. Nurses and aides meant well, but picked Petey up awkwardly, sending searing pain through his legs and back. Unaware that he wanted coffee, aides ignored his gestures and grunts. Instead of letting him cough himself out of choking spells, they pulled him forward and clapped his back, making matters worse. Several nights they placed him on his back to sleep. Moronic stares met his attempts to move. Unable to change position, he was tormented through the night. Hating to show irritation or anger, Petey had to force his will simply to survive. Pinched screams and icy stares helped communicate his displeasure, and he was lonely. The memory of Calvin came back to haunt Petey. Where had he been taken? Calvin became a simple memory of another time and another place. He no longer really existed. Life around the nursing home became a schedule that Petey lived by: breakfast, lunch, and supper. Thursday he played bingo. A volunteer moved his chips for him. Friday mornings, sing-along. Sunday, church services. With the coming of spring, aides placed Petey on the front lawn each day to enjoy the sun. He loved the school buses that roared past, carrying students home from a nearby school. Nothing, however, warded off the bitterness that enveloped Petey. Now he knew how Calvin had felt all those years, alone and afraid. Petey knew he could control his happiness by thinking of only good things, but why was it that every time he loved something it left? First there had been Esteban, next it was the mice, then Joe and Cassie. He would never forget Cassie. After that, Owen left. Then he had lost Calvin. They were his family, the only family he'd ever known. He still loved them, and no one could replace them. No one. Parked alone on the grass one day, Petey made a vow. He would still be happy, but from now on, no matter how difficult, he would never allow himself to love anyone again. He had been hurt for the last time.